History is full of people who smiled in your face and then drove a knife in your back. From a king who sent his best friend to the headsman, to the woman who triggered the fall of an entire empire, and the infamous traitor who took one of history's greatest betrayals to the grave. Today we're digging into the 12 worst low-down dirty rats in history on this episode of the Infographic Show, Assassination of Julius Caesar, Worst Betrayals in History. Number 12. The Assassination of Julius Caesar. When assassinating a tyrant, who is really the traitor? That's the question historians and writers have been arguing for more than 2,000 years. It was the height of the Roman Republic, and Julius Caesar stood at the center of its power. A brilliant general and a shrewd politician, he was the most influential Roman leader in generations, and he was rapidly consolidating that power. Rome was typically an early example of a constitutional monarchy, with the emperor being chosen by the government. But Julius Caesar was quickly making moves, and many feared that he planned to become a true absolute monarch, and even a dictator. And that's when some of his allies realized something had to be done. The architect of the plot to murder Caesar was Cassius Longinus, a powerful senator and a general who had much to lose if Caesar gained absolute power. But he needed help, and that came in the form of his brother-in-law, Marcus Brutus, a close friend and ally of Caesar. Brutus was initially skeptical, but eventually became convinced that they had to strike before it was too late, and Brutus's respect and influence among his fellow senators allowed him to recruit co-conspirators. This would turn into one of the most dramatic murders of all time. Brutus believed that this must be a legitimate act of the Senate, not a private murder plot, so they recruited over 60 senators to ambush Caesar and stab him to death. Brutus argued against a purge of Caesar's supporters because they were acting on behalf of law and justice. But in the end, when Caesar was stabbed to death, it was one man he focused on, his friend Brutus, whose name would become synonymous with betrayal. But in the end, it was all for nothing. In the aftermath, Caesar was remembered by many as a fallen hero, and Rome descended into civil war afterward. The chaos that followed saw the rise of several young and unstable emperors, each more incompetent than the last. Eventually, power fell into the hands of Augustus, who consolidated authority much the same way Caesar had intended, but with overwhelming public support. In the end, the assassination didn't stop the rise of a dictatorship, it accelerated it. The only difference was that Caesar wasn't around to see it, and it's not every day that a betrayal becomes a Shakespeare play. You might have never heard of this next traitor, but she caused a lot of damage. Number 11. La Malinche. Born in the Aztec Empire, La Malinche, also known as Malintzin, was an ordinary woman from the Gulf Coast who would become one of the most controversial figures in history. A member of the Nahua tribe, she reportedly came from a prominent family, but her life took a drastic turn early on. It's believed that she was sold into slavery as a child, though claims that her own parents sold her remain disputed. What is clear is that she spent time with both the Aztec and the Chontal Maya people, giving her a strong command of the language, and that would make her a key player one day. We all know that in 1492 Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and it wasn't long before more Spaniards followed. Amongst them was Hernán Cortés, a ruthless conquistador known for his brutal conquest of Mexico. But unlike the island tribesmen that Columbus encountered, Cortés faced the most powerful empire of the New World, the Aztecs. Cortés would face fierce opposition, and if he was going to succeed, he would need someone who understood both the land and the language. And in La Malinche, that is exactly what he found. After the Maya were defeated in battle, they offered gifts to the Spaniards in exchange for peace, among them a group of enslaved women, including La Malinche. While most of the women were taken as consorts, it quickly became clear that she possessed something far more valuable: unique language skills. Cortés's interpreter, Jerónimo de Aguilar, realized that this could be a key asset. Sensing an opportunity, Cortés promised her freedom and riches, but only if she would help him locate and communicate with the Aztec ruler, Moctezuma. And this would be the Aztecs' undoing. La Malinche played a crucial role in early negotiations, providing vital translation and cultural insight. But when a plot was brewing against the Spaniards, she warned Cortés, leading to a bloody massacre. It was the beginning of the end of the Aztecs, as the Spanish forces now had superior forces, and they pressed home their advantage. La Malinche would eventually have a child with Cortés, and was treated well in the aftermath. Yet today, historians heavily debate her role in the fall of the Aztecs. Was she a kidnapped woman who did what was needed in order to survive, or a cold-blooded traitor who sold an empire in exchange for a taste of the high life? It doesn't get much higher than this next guy, but that didn't stop him. He betrayed his country twice. Number 10. John C. Calhoun. In 1824, Andrew Jackson was preparing for his second shot at the presidency. The firebrand general known as Old Hickory had won the previous election, but without a majority of electoral votes, the decision went to Congress, where he was ultimately denied the office. This time, he was determined not to lose, and he planned to come back bigger and bolder. One key move was picking former Congressman and Secretary of War John C. Calhoun as his vice president. Calhoun was a fiery Southern radical known for his brash statements and his strong support for slavery, and he would turn out to be much more trouble than he was worth. Jackson may have easily won the presidency, but he and Calhoun never saw eye to eye. Their friction came to a head when Jackson instituted harsh tariffs, which Calhoun believed favored Northerners. Southern states announced that they would refuse to enforce the tariffs, and Calhoun supported them, siding with his regional allies over the president that he served under. This was known as nullification, and it kicked off one of the U.S.'s first major crises. Tensions escalated to the brink of armed conflict, with Jackson threatening to hang his own vice president. The standoff proved irreparable, and Calhoun ultimately resigned from office. But he was far from done being a thorn in the country's side. He would be elected to the Senate from South Carolina shortly after resigning, and while the nullification crisis died out with a compromise bill, Calhoun had found a new issue to focus on: slavery. Abolitionists were growing in power, and Calhoun hated them with a passion. Not only did Calhoun defend the right of Southerners to keep their slaves, but he went even further, arguing that slaveholders should be allowed to bring their enslaved people into free states if they wished. By the late 1840s, the nation was on the brink of civil war, so desperate attempts were made to create a compromise and keep the Union together. And as his last act, Calhoun would do whatever he could to sabotage it. By 1849, Calhoun was an old, dying man. The Senate was debating what would become the Compromise of 1850, a series of measures intended to preserve the fragile relationship between North and South. While the compromise was seen as largely favorable to Southern interests, it still wasn't enough for Calhoun. Suffering from tuberculosis, Calhoun was too sick to deliver a speech, but that didn't stop him penning a fiery missive that would be read by his friend, Senator James Mason. In his speech, he painted a picture of the North actively waging war against the South, and he riled up pro-slavery activists. Even though he died soon after and the compromise passed, many historians believe that this was the moment civil war became inevitable, and the man most responsible was gone a full decade before the first shots were fired. Sometimes the scariest thing about a traitor is just how long they get away with it. Number 9. Robert Hansen. To all who knew him, Robert Hansen was an all-American guy. He grew up in Chicago under the strict hand of an abusive father, himself a police officer. But that didn't stop Hansen from pursuing a career in law enforcement. He tried to join the National Security Agency fresh out of college, but was rejected. He eventually followed in his father's footsteps, first becoming a police officer and then an internal affairs investigator, and in 1976, he achieved his dream of joining the FBI. And with great power comes great opportunity. Hansen would work for the FBI for several decades, primarily in counterintelligence. The Cold War was still going on in the 70s, and his first task was to collect a database of Soviet intelligence. Everyone knew that this would involve some spycraft, but no one knew that Hansen would be playing both sides. Not long after he was given the resources he needed, Hansen approached a Soviet intelligence agent and offered his services as a double agent. Over the next few decades, he would be responsible for some of the worst intelligence disasters in the history of the FBI. And one day, it would all come crashing down. Hansen would be transferred several times to key divisions in the FBI, and every time he would take his new information and provide it to his Russian handlers. He worked with the KGB directly, revealing the identities of American assets in Russia, several of whom were later executed. When the USSR disbanded in 1991, he dialed back his activities, only to re-establish contact with the newly formed Russian Federation. For years, he remained undetected. But in 2001, Hansen was promoted to a position with limited access to classified material. He knew something was wrong, and he was right. After making a drop on February 18, 2001, he was arrested. The public was shocked by just how much he had gotten away with over the decades, and the FBI faced a reckoning for its intelligence failures. Hansen would ultimately plead guilty to avoid the death penalty and spent the rest of his life in prison. But there was one thing that stood out about this case, unlike many other famous Soviet spies. There was no evidence that he was a communist. He had betrayed his country not for red reasons, but for green. The only thing he cared about was money. But sometimes you don't betray the government betrays you. Number 8. Thomas Cromwell. In the Middle Ages, working for a king or a queen was like walking a tightrope. Monarchs held absolute power. One word from them and you could be dead by morning. Serving them meant carrying out their every command, which sometimes involved changing the entire law of the land, all while offering just the right amount of flattery to stay alive. It took a lot of skill, and Thomas Cromwell had that in abundance. The powerful and intelligent statesman and lawyer was the most powerful figure in the court of Henry VIII, and he was known as the whisperer for the mercurial king. And he would be at the center of the king's most famous acts. When the king wanted a male heir, Cromwell helped arrange the annulment of King Henry VIII's marriage to Catherine of Aragon so he could marry Anne Boleyn. This meant that he was in open conflict with the Roman Catholic Church, a clash that led to the creation of the Church of England. Cromwell was one of the most powerful figures behind the rise of Protestantism, and his reforms made him one of England's most significant figures. And all he had to do was keep on the king's good side. There was just one problem: the more powerful you become, the more enemies you make. Cromwell's influence on the king was resented by many, including Anne Boleyn. He's believed to have played a key role in her execution, but he soon ran into trouble. The king's marriage to Anne of Cleves was a disaster, and Cromwell took much of the blame. That provided an opening, and his enemies began spreading rumors to the king that he was conspiring against him. Cromwell was soon arrested at a council meeting and accused of various charges, including treason against the crown. Cromwell probably thought the king would bail him out, but it wasn't to be. Henry VIII was only loyal to those who he saw as serving him properly, and Cromwell had fallen out of favor. The king stood by as a series of bizarre charges were levied against his loyal aide, including a claim that he had been planning to marry the king's daughter. He would be sentenced to death and reportedly cried out, "So this is my reward for loyal service." He would be publicly beheaded and his head placed on a spike on the London Bridge. While the king oversaw this and let his loyal ally be put to death, he would reportedly lament this in the years to come. After all, good help is hard to find. And sometimes the smarter a traitor, the more they get away with. Number 7. John Anthony Walker. Let's turn back the clock to the heyday of espionage, the Cold War. The US and Russia were locked in a high-stakes game of secrets, each desperate to uncover the other's next move. And sometimes all it took was a single, well-placed mole to unravel an entire intelligence operation. Spies were currency those days, traded in prisoner swaps and used to tip the balance of power. Rooting them out became a top priority, and no one played a more critical role in that effort than the chief warrant officers of the US Navy. But sometimes the call is coming from inside the house. John Anthony Walker Jr. didn't have the kind of early life that one would expect from a high-profile traitor. He began his adulthood as a petty thief. He was offered a choice of jail or the military. He chose the Navy, and he seemed to thrive in his new setting. He advanced to a chief petty officer and would be stationed on a nuclear submarine, but he kept on making bad choices, including opening a bar that quickly put him in debt. He was also a member of the John Birch Society, a radical group with strong anti-communist views, which made his next turn all the more shocking. After being promoted to warrant officer in 1967, he began to work in communications in Norfolk, Virginia, which gave him access to the entire communication center for U.S. submarines. That, plus his financial difficulties, made him a perfect target for the Soviets. He would soon offer them a top-secret document containing radio ciphers from the submarines, and they would offer him a regular spy gig in exchange. He would rise so high in the spy ranks that he would answer directly to a Soviet KGB general. But Walker's undoing would be those closest to him, his family. Walker was abusive to his wife, Barbara, and one night in a drunken haze, the now former Miss Walker contacted the FBI, completely unaware that he had already begun pulling their son into the world of espionage. While the feds initially assumed that she was just an embittered ex, they investigated and they broke up a massive spy ring, one that's believed to have helped the Soviets decipher more than 1 million encrypted naval messages. It's considered one of the most damaging Soviet spy operations in American history, and all of the conspirators received life sentences except for Walker's son, who secured a reduced sentence after his father pleaded guilty and ratted on his co-conspirators. Now let's head way back to arguably the most famous betrayal of all time. Number 6. Benedict Arnold. There are a few names in history that are practically shorthand for traitor. We'll get to one of the others later. But few threw an entire war into chaos like Benedict Arnold. Born in the British colony of Connecticut, Arnold was a merchant who was increasingly disgusted with the way the British were treating the colonies. As the Revolutionary War ramped up, he decided to join the forces with the rebellious cause, and quickly caught the attention of the man at the center of it all. Before long, Benedict Arnold and George Washington were thick as thieves. Arnold quickly distinguished himself as one of the most capable commanders in the upstart American army. capturing Fort Ticonderoga in 1775. He also displayed innovative tactics that helped the smaller army fend off the British in New York. His leadership at the Battle of Richfield earned him a promotion to Major General, and Washington's trust in him continued to grow. But that wasn't enough for Arnold. He looked at the other generals rising faster than him, and resentment began to fester. Especially after injuries he sustained at the Battle of Saratoga forced him off of the front line, and idle minds make dangerous work. Rumors had been circulating for a while that Arnold was corrupt, using his command to enrich himself. He was acquitted of all serious charges, but he also had close friends in the loyalist circles of Philadelphia, including Peggy Shippen. And as the war raged, Arnold was secretly offered a fortune to commit the ultimate betrayal, hand over the strategically vital American fort at West Point to the British. The deal, brokered with British Major John Andre, promised Arnold £20,000, equivalent to over $3 million today. Had it succeeded, the blow to the American cause could have been fatal. But the plan unraveled when Andre was captured with incriminating documents that exposed the plot. So, like a coward, Arnold ran. While Andre was hanged for espionage, Arnold managed to escape justice. He fled to British lines, formally defected, and handed over valuable intelligence on the American forces. In return, he was named a brigadier general in the British Army, and he led them in several battles against the forces he used to command. But military success couldn't buy him one thing: respect. Even in Britain and Canada, he was viewed as a traitor who couldn't be trusted, and he died in 1801, his reputation in tatters. But Arnold wasn't the only person to betray a country. Number 5. Mir Jafar. In the 1700s, the British Empire was at its peak, and one of its growing seats of power was in the Indian subcontinent. The region was still heavily divided, and local leaders and warlords battled for control. That provided an opening for the British, and they found a potential ally in Mir Jafar. In the region of Bengal, Jafar was a powerful military commander and a key figure in the court of Siraj-ud-Dowlah, the reigning Nawab and hereditary ruler of the province, and it would turn out the last. Jafar had suffered a serious loss against the Maratha Empire in 1747, and it led him to having to withdraw in disgrace. He found a second chance in the service of Nawab of Bengal, who was at war with the British colonists at that point. Jafar successfully routed Governor Drake's forces and drove him away from the British fort, but it didn't lead to the promotion that he was hoping for. Instead, he was sidelined by Siraj-ud-Dowlah, and he watched as his rival was promoted in front of him. So much like LeBron, he took his talents somewhere else, straight into the waiting arms of the British. Siraj was increasingly seen as a tyrant, and Mir Jafar found allies in other nobles in the region, and they hatched a risky plan: reach out to the East India Company and broker a deal. The idea was that the British could be negotiated with, and this would give them a prominent position in the new order. Agents were sent to negotiate, and Mir Jafar, using his position as paymaster of the Bengal army, funneled what would amount to millions of pounds to the British. And soon, the perfect opportunity arrived. At the Battle of Plassey, Mir Jafar betrayed Siraj to the British, and the Nawab of Bengal was captured and executed. In the exchange for his loyalty, Mir Jafar was given the throne, but he was little more than a puppet of the British East India Company. He had achieved his dream, but it soon turned out to be a nightmare. The British demands were relentless, and in desperation, Jafar attempted to switch sides by reaching out to the Dutch. His double-cross was discovered, and within a few years he was forced to abdicate in favor of his son-in-law. But hey, at least maybe he was the inspiration for a Disney villain's name 200 years later. And as the 20th century dawned, spycraft entered a new phase. Number 4. Alfred Riddle. World War I kicked off with the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, but many historians believe it was inevitable. The great powers of Europe had been preparing for conflict for years, stockpiling weapons, forming alliances, and engaging in espionage to gain the upper hand before the first shot was even fired. Two of the great powers of the era were the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Russian Empire, close neighbors and bitter rivals. A good intelligence agent was worth its weight in gold during this era, and they didn't come much better than Alfred Riddle, the chief of the counterintelligence wing of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. But it was all a lie. Riddle had been in the military since he was 15, amassed with an impressive record, and rose through the ranks despite coming from a poor background. He quickly achieved the rank of officer, and by 1907 he was heading the counterintelligence division. He was responsible for many of the country's innovations in the field, including the use of cameras, early recording devices, and fingerprint databases. These investigations would become key to spy work and would make it easy for the Empire to identify enemy agents, including, ironically, Riddle himself. Throughout his career, Riddle operated as a double agent for the Russian Empire. His betrayal doesn't appear to have been driven by ideology. Communism hadn't yet taken hold in Russia, and Riddle had no familial or cultural ties to the country. It's now widely believed that Riddle was a gay man, something considered not just scandalous at the time, but criminal, carrying the threat of imprisonment or worse. The Russian Empire is thought to have exploited this, using his secret as leverage to blackmail him into cooperation. Whatever the cause, he was paid well by the Russians and passed them classified war plans from Austro-Hungarian leadership. And eventually it all came crashing down. Riddle spied for Russia for well over a decade, and he's believed to have played a key role in the Austro-Hungarian army's initial struggles when they invaded Serbia. Ironically, his downfall came at the hands of his own successor in counterintelligence, Major Maximilian Ronga, who used the very surveillance and investigative techniques Riddle himself helped develop. Riddle was ultimately exposed after a suspicious money transfer led investigators to him. When confronted by several military officers, he confessed to his treason. In deference to his past service, the soldiers allowed Riddle to ensure that he would not be taken alive. But no era had more infamous spies than the Cold War. Number 3. Aldrich Ames. The FBI had its moles, and so did the CIA. The international branch of U.S. intelligence services had regular dealings with the most classified intelligence services in the world, and the agents were heavily vetted, but sometimes even the worst to get through. And Aldrich Ames was absolutely one of the worst. The son of school teachers, Aldrich Ames was raised in Wisconsin, but spent part of his youth in Southeast Asia after his father joined the CIA. That connection opened the door to Aldrich to following a similar path. And in 1957, while still a high school student, he got a low-level job as a records analyst, a position available to children of agency staff. And it was like letting a fox into the henhouse. Ames would later attend the University of Chicago to study foreign cultures and history. But after flunking out, he returned to the CIA as a worker and later a clerk. During the 50s and 60s, the agency's internal security protocols were notoriously lax, creating the opportunity for espionage. Despite his academic setbacks, Ames rose through the ranks and was eventually promoted. His first overseas assignment took him to Turkey, where he was tasked with identifying and recruiting Soviet intelligence officers. He continued to show promise, and he'd be promoted again and again, eventually handling high-level assets. But the CIA had missed one key thing. Ames had also been cutting deals with the Russians, and his access to classified information made him especially dangerous. He provided the Soviets with the most devastating kind of classified information, the identities of spies, both Russian defectors and American agents. He's believed to have compromised more assets than any other Soviet spy, which led many of those agents to their deaths. He got away with his crimes until 1993, after the fall of the Soviet Union, when he was fingered by electronic surveillance. And it caused an earthquake in the intelligence sector. Ames was guilty as sin, and he would eventually plead guilty and receive a life sentence. He is still alive today, and it turned out that he had significant dealings with Robert Hansen, who worked for the FBI. But given the number of assets he compromised, many asked how did he avoid detection for so long? There were many clues, as the assets working under him seemed to meet terrible fates. The government investigated but ultimately covered its own butt, as no one lost their job for mishandling the Ames case. But it may not have been the most damaging spy case in the Cold War. Number 2. Theodore Hall. The Manhattan Project was one of the most classified projects in American history. The race to the atom bomb was the highest-stakes science project in history. Under the watchful eye of J. Robert Oppenheimer, the U.S. won the race and World War II with it. So it's no surprise then that the physicists responsible were hand-picked and very carefully vetted. But even then, it's always possible for someone to slip through. And that's what happened with Theodore Hall, a physicist who committed a shocking betrayal. But we wouldn't know about it for decades. Born to a father who immigrated from Russia and a mother who was the daughter of immigrants from Eastern Europe, Hall was a classic American success story. He weathered the Great Depression and showed a great aptitude for math and science. He attended Harvard and studied physics, but was known to have an affinity for the Soviet Union after seeing their pavilion at the New York State Fair in 1939. At 18, he would become the youngest member of the Manhattan Project, and he was key to developing the uranium composition of Little Boy, as well as the implosion system of Fat Man. But as the bomb neared completion, Hall developed some serious doubts. By 1944, it was becoming clear Germany was on the verge of defeat, and Hall was worried about a U.S. monopoly on nuclear weapons. So while back in his hometown, he met with a Soviet agent and provided them with key schematics on the nuclear weapon systems. This was while the U.S. and the Soviets were still allies, but the U.S. was secretly planning for the coming Cold War. And so the Soviets got a leg up to develop their own bomb while all eyes were still on the Nazis and Imperial Japan. And the most shocking thing is, he got away with it. Hall's time in the U.S. Army would end in 1946 after his security clearance was revoked due to a joke in a letter from his sister-in-law that referenced the bomb. He would work in academia for the rest of his life, retiring in 1984, and he died in 1999. It wasn't until 2022 that Hall's treason came to light, when a journalist for The Nation investigated decades of communications and exposed Hall's involvement. And so, one of the strangest espionage cases in U.S. history was revealed. A brilliant scientist who helped America win the war and then handed its most closely guarded secrets to a nation who would become a bitter enemy. But there is no disgrace worse than spying for one enemy. Number 1. Harold Cole. World War II was a difficult time to live through, no matter where you were, and it helped to be able to work all corners. Harold Cole was familiar with that, as the British con man had been scraping by his entire life. He grew up in a slum and was a petty criminal, a con man, an ex-jailbird, and an army deserter. And as World War II began, he enlisted in the Royal Engineers, fresh out of prison, and his charm soon won over his commanding officers and any women he met along the way. And that charm would let him become a snake in the grass. Cole's time in the army didn't start smoothly with him being arrested for stealing from the mess fund. That left him stranded in France when British forces were evacuated from Dunkirk, and he relied on his guile for his next move. He created a fake identity as a British intelligence officer and formed connections with wealthy Frenchmen. He was key to helping many British soldiers escape, but also he used this opportunity to embezzle heavily. He was arrested for this, but escaped out of a window before he could be put on trial for fraud. It was clear that there was no situation that he wouldn't take advantage of, and that included siding with the enemy. On the run from his former French and British allies, Cole was arrested by Nazi intelligence in occupied France, and he wasted no time providing information on the Allies. This led to devastating losses in the French resistance, as several key leaders were arrested and killed. Cole was so willing and eager to betray his former colleagues that many had suspected that he was a German agent all along. But this seems unlikely, as he tried to escape from the Germans as well, and he spent much of the war in prison. After his release, he went to work for the head of the SS in Paris, and he was soon sent back to Allied territory, where he posed as both a British and American officer, gathering intelligence under false identities. Wherever he went, he corrupted those he worked with, including getting American soldiers to loot and brutalize local populations for him. But every con man reaches the end of the road eventually. Cole was exposed when one of his many mistresses shared his postcard with an MI9 officer. As the war drew to a close, he was finally arrested, but not for long. In classic Cole fashion, he escaped, this time by stealing an American military uniform and going on the run. But karma caught up fast. French officers hunting deserters found him, and a gunfight broke out. Cole was shot multiple times. It was a brutal but fitting end for one of the most hated traitors of World War II, a coward who would turn on any ally on a dime if it benefited him. Not even the mighty were safe from betrayal. But what really happened during one of history's most literal backstabbings, the Ides of March? Find out what actually happened the day Julius Caesar was assassinated, or click on this video instead.